Welcome back, my friends. Ian Fleming's James Bond novels and their weapons loadout. We'll take the novels up from Dr. No and go to the last of the Fleming books. Geoffrey Boothroyd had a huge impact on Fleming, but Ian still fumbles a bunch of gun specs in some cases, making the exact identification challenging, but that's what we're here for. So, let's dive into the world of literary Bond through the lens of PCZ TV. Today's episode, Boothroyd's Bullets. 1958's Dr. No. What a sea change in outfitting of James Bond in this novel. Important? An entire chapter was dedicated to reviewing and choosing the new guns of James Bond. So, let's unpack the background. Shortly before the publication of From Russia with Love in 1956, Fleming received a fan letter from a Geoffrey Boothroyd. Boothroyd told Fleming that he really admired the Bond novels, apart from the hero's choice of weapon. He felt that the Beretta 418 was a ladies' gun, with no real stopping power. He also objected to the choice of holster. Boothroyd proposed that Bond should use a revolver, like the Smith & Wesson Centennial Airweight. It had no external hammer, so it would not catch on Bond's clothes. The Smith & Wesson could be kept in a Burns Martin triple-draw holster, head in place with a spring clip, which would decrease Bond's draw time. In addition, Boothroyd also had bad words about the silencer Bond occasionally used, saying that they were rarely silent and reduced the power of a gun. Fleming actually replied. He thanked the Major for his letter and shared some of his opinions on why he had selected Bond's kit-out. Fleming felt that Bond ought to have an automatic gun. Perhaps Boothroyd could then recommend one. He agreed that the Beretta 418 lacked power, but pointed out that Bond had used more powerful weapons when the need required. The correspondence continued. Boothroyd recommended the Walther PPK as being the best choice for an automatic of that size because its ammunition is available everywhere. He suggested, however, that 007 ought to have a revolver for long-range work. Fleming asked Boothroyd if he could lend his illustrator, Richard Chopping, one of his guns to be painted for the cover of From Russia with Love. I covered this in the last video, so I won't belabor that issue. In fact, Fleming was so impressed with Boothroyd that he created a character, an armorer by the name of Major Boothroyd, who Fleming introduces in Dr. No and goes into great depth on 007's weapons. So let's kick off the post-Boothroyd era with this book, Dr. No. The first gun seen in the novel is not Bond's. It's the assassins who are carrying, quote, 3 revolvers, ungainly with their sausage-shaped silencers. Whew, a lot of alliteration there. Now, despite what Hollywood tells you, revolvers are not used with silencers. There's a gap between the cylinder and the forcing cone which allows gas and noise to vent. However, there is one exception. The Russian Nagant M 1895 revolver is unique in the world of revolvers in that the cylinder moves forward and forms a seal with the barrel. This gas seal system allows the weapon to be suppressed. The Nagant was used by both the KGB and the NKVD, and truly were assassination pistols. While never made in China, these revolvers were used during the Chinese Civil War, being supplied to the Chinese Communist forces by the Russians. Given that Dr. No is a baddie, and this team is working for him, perhaps he's outfitted them with firearms from China. Did Fleming intend for this to be the revolver? Probably not, but if you're going to have a suppressed revolver in this period, this is probably it. The next scene is perhaps the most famous gear scene in the movies, and it takes up a complete chapter in the book. In it, M brings up the armorer, who Fleming describes as the greatest small arms expert in the world. The character of Major Boothroyd reviews Bond's gun and, as in real life, derided the .25 Beretta. My thoughts on this are in the first video of this series, so free go back, take a look, watch, and make your own decision. Then he goes on to voice his opinions on silencers. I don't like silencers. They're heavy and get stuck in your clothing. Well, to be fair, Bond himself agrees. I agree with you about silencers. They're a nuisance, but sometimes you have to use them. And while silencers don't work in the real world like they do in the movies or books, they're more like a muffler in a car, where they don't make it totally silent, but they do reduce the sound of, say, straight pipes. Moving on, M then asks, well, Armor, what do you recommend? And now is here where the armorer makes famous a small automatic. I've just been testing most of the automatics. Of all of them, I'd choose the Walther PPK 7.65mm. Interesting, though, he actually qualifies it. It came in fourth after the Japanese M14, the Tokarev, and the Sauer. But he likes its trigger and the extension spur. It's a real stopping gun. Not sure what that means. But of course it's .32 caliber, and he wouldn't recommend anything lighter. Thus, Bond is issued the now famous Walther PPK. The chapter where this exchange happens goes into great detail, and, as usual, we'll break it down in great detail. I will say that this is not forgotten weapons. I'm not as well read as Ian, so I won't spend the next hour chatting about the entire development period of the PPK. Let's start off with Boothroyd's first three high-performing guns. The Japanese M14, also known as the Nambu. It fires a light 8x22 bottleneck cartridge. These were some of the sidearms issued to the Japanese forces in the Second World War. They're not small concealment pistols, but relatively speaking, they do fire a round which is underpowered compared to the other country's military sidearms. Next up is another full-size service pistol, the Tokarev. This also uses a bottleneck cartridge, but one much more powerful than the Nambu. This was the automatic designed to replace the Nagant revolver in Soviet usage. And, like all Soviet weapons of the era, it was a simple, robust, and brutal design. The Sauer M38, known as the Sauer 38H, this was a small automatic with an internal hammer. It fired the .32 ACP round, just like the PPK, and was used during World War II in much the same roles as the PPK. Unlike the PPK, however, production ended with the end of World War II. According to a review by the NRA, there are many who consider the Sauer 38H to be at least equal to the Walthers in style and efficiency. In fact, some feel it's actually superior to the Walther PPK due to its internal hammer. Sauer pistol was introduced in 1938, and because of the things going on in Germany at the time, and the drying up of foreign markets, the firm was unable to take full advantage of civilian sales before and after World War II. Hence the fact that it's somewhat forgotten today. Honestly, this is a fine pistol and could easily have been Bond's gun. And now, the PPK. The Walther Police Pistol. Polizei-Pistol. Oh, I totally butchered that. Sorry for those people who speak German. Known as the Walther PP, it was launched in 1929. A shortened version, the PPK, is an abbreviation for Polizei-Pistol Kriminal. Again, apologies to the German speakers out there. It literally means police pistol criminal, which is essentially the Germans' way of saying detective special. It was a shortened and reduced in size PP, designed for concealment. This pistol has been in constant production since its introduction. It comes in a variety of calibers from .22 long rifle up to .380. Walther currently only offers this PPK in the US in either .22 or .380, so you don't get one of Bond's .32s unless you go for a used gun. Surprisingly, I won't go into depth on the PPK beyond that. It's been covered elsewhere, and, like M said, that's settled then. M's voice was final. And what about something bigger? Smith & Wesson's Centennial Airweight Revolver, 38 caliber, hammerless, so it won't catch on clothing. Cylinder only holds 5 cartridges, but by the time they're gone, somebody's been killed. Fires the 38 Smith & Wesson Special. Very accurate cartridge indeed, said Boothroyd. M. So it's the Walther and the Smith & Wesson. Send up one of each to 007. Thus began the love affair with Bond and the Walther, but wait, what about the Smith? Alas, Fleming would rely more on just the Walther as the novels proceeded. And as Sir Sean Connery, posing with the Walther, established it as the Bond gun, just as the vodka martini became the Bond drink. Regardless that the novels had Bond both using the Smith and drinking more than just a martini. But this is how legends are born. Now, as an aside, this video series focuses on Fleming and his novels. If you're interested in the actual weapons used in the movies, may I recommend Mark Hazard and his book 007 The Armory. It is amazing. Mark goes into depth into the weapons in the movies to the point where he actually has the serial numbers of the weapons used. This is a must for every fan of James Bond and firearms. I can't recommend this book highly enough. Quick aside, as has been said many times, the Burns Martin triple draw holster, which is a tongueful, is designed only to carry revolvers, but is issued for the PPK. Well, this is an odd mistake, given that Fleming had bought such an excellent holster and had it sent to Jamaica. So, it's been argued that Q Branch could have modified this holster to accommodate automatics, or perhaps Fleming just liked the name Burns Martin triple draw holster, and I've got to practice that more. Back to Dr. No. In Chapter 9, we find the baddies using "The other was manning a machine gun on a tripod. It looked to Bond like a Spandau." The MG-08 was the primary machine gun for the Germans in World War I. This is actually a development of the famous Maxim gun, which was the direct father of most of the famous heavy machine guns in World War I on both sides of the conflict. It's entirely possible that this is the weapon. It's always used on a tripod, except the line, "They pause to change the magazine." The Spandau is a belt-fed weapon. So what could it be? Given the quotes of the Ardennes, perhaps this is an MG-34 or 42 used by the German forces in World War II. British troops sometimes called these machine guns Spandau, which was a generic term for them, if you will, for all German machine guns, left over from the Allied nickname for the MG-08 Maxim-derived machine gun we spoke about earlier. These guns could be fitted to a tripod, and in some cases they were fed by drum magazines. So I'm going to say that this is the most likely candidate. On a side note, it's interesting that Bond was in the Ardennes. That area is famous for the Battle of the Bulge. It's also home of Orval beer, which, as everyone will agree, is the best beer in the world. Chapter 10 introduces us to the Remington carbine. Bond took it. It was a U.S. Army Remington carbine 300. The M1 carbine is a delightful weapon. Designed to provide rear echelon troops with a more powerful and accurate firearm than a pistol, these were soon adopted by the frontline troops. It fires the .30 carbine round, which has in the past been derided due to some questionable reports from the Korean War, but the reality is this round performs similar to a .357 Magnum cartridge. That is held in quite high esteem. The carbine is light, handy, can carry either a 15 or a 30 round magazine, and is perfect for jungle fight in close quarters. So a perfect rifle to choose, except Fleming confuses the situation. Remington never made the M1 carbine for the U.S. Army. They did have some automatic rifles, namely the Woodmaster 740 and 742, but these weren't offered in .300 or 30 carbine. I'm guessing this is just another case, see the last video, of Fleming just loving the Remington name. But given he's called out the U.S. Army in the description, then I'm going with the M1 carbine, which is a great choice. Chapter 19 brings us to the last of the named weapons of Dr. No, a Smith & Wesson 38, the regular model. This is probably a 4-inch Model 10, as that was such a popular model for the police during the time frame. You know, it's interesting, in the first group of novels, Fleming probably would have outfitted the person with a Colt Police Positive, as he seemed inclined to like the Colt name, as he did the Remington name. The final bit is quite funny. In the novels, Bond is a little cranky, and he sends back this cable. Kindly inform armor, Smith & Wesson ineffective against flamethrower. 1959's Goldfinger. This would become perhaps the most iconic Bond movie of all time. Of course, Bond is now equipped with his legendary PPK. In Chapter 4 of Goldfinger, Fleming describes how, in a hotel room in Miami, James Bond opens his suitcase and takes out the Bible designed to be read as literature, opening the book to retrieve his Walther PPK in a Burns Martin holster. Well, thanks to the fine folks at James Bond Meme for finding this book. This book was published in the U.S. by Simon & Schuster in 1936 and published soon after, 1937 or so, in Britain. The title of this book tells us that Bond has the British edition, not the title of the American edition. Well, at least he's not hollowing out the Holy Bible. Link in the description below to read more about this book. Bond and Aston Martin. In the book, it's a DB3. And of course, Fleming goes back to his famed terms such as long-barreled. In the case, he's talking about a long-barreled Colt 45 hidden in a secret compartment. Now, in the last video, I discussed what this mysterious long-barreled Colt 45 was. So you can go back and follow my logic on why I think it's the Colt 1911. Or just take my word for it. In the last chapter of Goldfinger, Bond picks up Goldfinger's pistol. It was a Colt 25 automatic. I'm guessing he's referring to the model 1908 Vest Pocket Colt. Compact hammerless striker fire, semi-automatic single-action pistol. Manufactured by Colt from 1908 to 1948, it was a small, concealable firearm. It was designed by none other than John Moses Browning. It was also introduced by Fabrique Nationale as the FN model 1906. Both pistols were chambered for the Browning-invented 25 ACP cartridge, ironically the same one that was in the Beretta 418. The Colt model 1908 also saw limited service with the American and British OSS and SOE units during World War II, due to its nature as a small, concealable pistol. It's possible that Fleming came across this gun through his wartime service. But honestly, look at this. It's such a cute little pistol, you sort of want to just pinch its cheeks. In 1959, Fleming published a series of short stories. He was playing with the art form at the time and probably seeing if he could interest movie or TV producers in his product. But in any case, we get the first mention, and it's of the classic Luger pistol called out in From a View to a Kill. This firearm has been shorthand for bad guys in Hollywood for years. Known as the P08, it was a full-sized 9mm sidearm issued to the German army in 1908. A .45 caliber ACP version was actually prototyped for the U.S. military pistol trials, but it lost out to the 1911. The Luger was an expensive pistol to produce, and the German military looked for alternatives, finally settling upon the Walther P38 in 1938. But the Luger feels great in the hand, and let's face it, as far as pistols go, it's pretty sexy. Now, speaking about the U.S. military, the 1911 shows up next. Bond pulled out the long-barreled .45 Colt. He kept the safety catch up. Again, in the last video, I explained that no Colt revolver has a safety catch, so this must be the 1911. The story ends with the mention of a .22 target pistol. The description is so generic, it could be anything. The next story, For Your Eyes Only. It has Bond with his trusty PPK. But Fleming goes on to show his love of lever guns. A new Savage 99F, 5-shot repeater. The Savage 99, or Model 1899, are a series of hammerless lever-action rifles created by the Savage Arms Company. The Model 99 family is unique in that it has a rotary magazine, although later they added some detachable magazine models. The rifle was very popular with big game hunters, and was even issued to the Montreal Home Guard during the First World War. The .250 Savage is a rifle cartridge created by Charles Newton in 1915. It was designed specifically to be used in the Savage Model 99. And we end on Quantum of Solace, which didn't include any firearms, and Risco, which just mentioned the PPK. So we'll move on. 1961's Thunderball. One of my favorite movies, by the way. But now much has been written about the writing of this novel. It would lead to lawsuits and rights issues that would even lead up to a reboot of Thunderball movie with Sir Sean Connery in Never Say Never Again. But that's a story for a different time. Weapons-wise, this movie is simplistic. In Chapter 8, Sub-Operator G drew out the Colt with his right. Now, this could be anything. Long barrel, sawn, skeleton grips, Remington, who knows? Very vague. In Chapter 17, Bond takes a serious dislike to some of the local fish. He took out his Walther PPK and shot a bunch of sharks. Shark fin soup tonight for dinner, boys. In quite a departure from his previous stories, 1962's The Spy Who Loved Me is written from the perspective of a woman who encounters Bond. Firearm-wise, it's very vague. And as it's written from the perspective of a woman, perhaps it was intentional on Fleming's part. For instance, Chapter 11, Bond says, I had a couple of guns, heavy ones. Now, and then he talked about a chopper or a subgun. But it's Chapter 12 which really causes a glitch in the Matrix. Fleming is mixing up his Smith & Wesson and Colt model names. Is it a Smith & Wesson, which would probably be a Model 10? Or is it a Colt Police Positive? Oh, Ian, what are you doing? I actually had to go back and wonder if I typed this wrong. Nope. So, which one is it? Smith & Wesson or Colt? Who knows? In Chapter 13, Bond's weapon is described as a heavy automatic, and he changes the magazine in Chapter 14. I'm guessing this is the Colt 1911 that Fleming had previously described, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. 1963, Fleming is really pumping out those Bond stories. This year, it's On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Bond is kitted out with his trusty Walther PPK, and it's mentioned in Chapters 1, 23, and 24. But in Chapter 25, we are introduced to a new weapon in the series, the Schmeitzer. Well, it's likely that this is referring to the standard submachine gun of the Wehrmacht in World War II, the MP-40. The MP-40 was often called the Schmeitzer by the Allies after Hugo Schmeitzer, who designed the MP-18. Hugo, however, was not involved in the design or the production of the MP-40. But this is not unlike every machine gun that a Tommy encountered in World War II being called a Spandau, regardless of whether or not it actually was a Spandau. The MP-40 is a subgun that you'll see in all the World War II movies. 9mm, 32-round box magazine, cyclic rate of around 500 rounds a minute. It also had the nickname of burp gun. It's 1964, and Bond is off to Japan for You Only Live Twice. Oh, hang on. Let me change this to a more modern cover. This is the one I have. Much better. Japan has very strict gun laws, back then and now. But it's not just due to gun laws that there are no guns and you only live twice. Tanaka says he never approved of agents carrying guns and other obvious weapons. I guess the old ninja ways are better. So Bond's choices of weapons are, therefore, somewhat limited. A small pocket knife, a thin chain of steel. But the bad guys, as usual, don't play fair. Blofeld has a samurai sword, and one of his henchmen actually has a gun. Well, that's not cricket. And Kono was rude enough to shoot at Bond. What kind of gun? Who can tell? It's not described. But perhaps we can take a guess and go back to Fleming's knowledge of guns from an earlier novel and flash back to the Nambu. It would make sense as a weapon that was kept hidden after war by the baddies. They were plentiful and available. But I don't know. This is entirely speculation. 1965, and The Man with the Golden Gun is published. Bond lost his memory at the end of You Only Live Twice, and after seeing the movie and watching Sir Sean Connery go disguised as a Japanese fisherman, I sometimes wish I had lost my memory also. But we start The Golden Gun with Bond brainwashed by those naughty KGB types and sent back to kill M with a cyanide gas gun. The description was brief, just snub-nosed black metal. Now there are pistols on the market which fire gas. Typically it's pepper spray or mace. I think that cyanide is frowned upon, but in theory, all these are entirely possible. Then we move on to the big bad of the story. Francisco Paco Pistols Scaramanga. Well, Chapter 3 tells us that his main weapon is a gold-plated, long-barreled, single-action Colt 45. And he uses special bullets. And he actually loads the ammunition himself. So it's funny, I was just chatting about the single-action models in the last video. Well, this one is easy to guess what it is by the description and the painting on the dust cover. I guess Fleming really wanted to leverage that image. These pistols come in several barrel lengths, and they are very accurate. But to fire, you have to manually cock the hammer back before you can pull the trigger. The biggest problem is that they are slow to reload, because you have to rotate the cylinder to extract the cartridge one at a time. I guess if you're a cracked shot like Scaramanga, you don't really need to worry about combat reloads. Is it practical? Not really. They're hard to conceal, slow to shoot, slow to reload, but they look pretty cool. And Scaramanga apparently didn't like birds, as he shoots quite a few with his gun in the book. But it also shows that Scaramanga is a bit of a gun enthusiast, in that he reloads his own ammunition. And Bond? What is he carrying? Well, you can guess this one. The exchange between Bond and Scaramanga in Chapter 6 has Bond nonchalantly sharing his carry gun. Surprise, Walther PPK. The final gun is not described in detail in the book. It's the last-ditch effort by Scaramanga to kill Bond. It's a tiny gold Derringer. The origin of the name comes from the original Philadelphia Derringer. It was a muzzle-loading cap-lock single-shot pistol produced in 1825 by Henry Derringer, and his name has been synonymous with small single or double-shot pistols since. Now, given Fleming's love of Remington and his use of cowboy symbolism, not only in the single-action Army Colt, but also the lever guns, I'm guessing he was thinking about the Remington Model 95 double-barrel Derringer. These were made from 1866 until the end of their production in 1935. The gun was only made in .41 rimfire during this time. The Remington Derringer designed a double capacity of the standard Derringer while maintaining the compact size by adding two barrels, one on top of the other. There were 4 models with several variations, but at the end of the day, the .41 short bullet moved really slowly, around half the speed of a modern .45 ACP. These are also often found in Hollywood westerns, so thematically, it seems to be consistent with the character of Scaramanga. A final note, Bond did get an award for this event, the Jamaican Police Medal for gallant and meritorious service to the independent state of Jamaica. Good show, Mr. Bond. Octopussy. Not a high-action spy story, per se. It's more of Bond being a homicide detective and tracing down the killer in a cold case. Well, no pun intended. He confronts Smythe during the course of the investigation and confronts him about the latter's revolver, a regulation Webley Scott .45 with the serial number 8967362. Smythe replies that it certainly was a Webley. Damn clumsy weapon. Hope they've got something more like the Luger or the heavy Beretta these days. Well, these big .455 revolvers harken back to the First World War. Webley, break-top actions, big, slow-moving bullets. If it looks familiar, it was also in the hands of a certain famous archaeologist. As for Luger, we spoke about that earlier. And the heavy Beretta? He's probably referring to the Model 51. During the war, the Italian army issued the Model 34, which is a smaller pistol chambered in .380. And after the war, they developed the Model 51 to fire the more powerful 9mm round. Oh, a fun fact. The Model 34 was shown in the movie Dr. No instead of the .418 as Bond's troublesome Beretta. In actual fact, it's quite a good firearm, and is every bit as good as the Valtha. Another fun fact is that years later, the Beretta 92 would be adopted by the U.S. military to replace the 1911. The story, The Property of a Lady, nothing. But we make up for it in The Living Daylights. Now, this is an interesting one. Bond is enlisted as a sniper. We see him getting used to the rifle at, quote, the famous Century Range at Bisley. Bisley? This is the National Rifle Association's range, which still exists to this day. And their own description is that it's a full-bore rifle shooting club on a 3,000-acre range with training and firearms for hire. Address? Kingsway, Bisley Camp, Brookwood, Century Way, Walking, GU24 OPB, United Kingdom. The weapon of choice? A custom-built .308 caliber Winchester. He mentions it's a target rifle. Now, I'm going to go with one of the most famous of the Winchester rifles, the Model 70. These are renowned for their accuracy, and they were used by the Marine Corps and the U.S. Army in competitive shooting matches. In fact, one of the most famous of the U.S. snipers, Carlos Hitchcock, used a Model 70, albeit in .30-06, during the Vietnam War. Now, having said that, they do already come with a 5-round internal magazine. But the description of the rifle goes on to describe something that sounds somewhat like the outfitting of the rifles used in the Olympics. These things look so high-tech and futuristic that I can easily see the attraction of them to someone like Fleming. particularly in the description of the curled aluminum hand and the adjustable pinion. Now, the rifle was topped with an infrared scope. I spoke more about these options in the last video, so you can go back and see the options there and make your own decision. Now, for Bond's opponent, Bond describes the rifle as a Kalashnikov, a sub-machine gun. Gas-operated 7.62mm, favorite with the KGB. The classic AK, one of the most widely produced guns of the world. They've been in numerous fights and battles since they were developed in the late 40s. Low cost, rugged, reliable. Fires a 7.62 by 39 cartridge, not known for their accuracy per se, but for doing a quote-unquote saturation job. This rifle will do the trick. Time for a nightcap and a recap. How did Fleming do? Silenced revolver. We'll say Nagant and give Fleming a pass. PPK. Bond arguably made this gun famous. I can't think of another small pistol from Germany that is still in production to this day from that era. Smith & Wesson Airweight, solid choice. MG42, superb weapon. M1 carbine, good choice. Smith & Wesson Model 10, good choice. Interesting, he veered away from his fondness of the Colt Police Positive towards the Smith. And we will not speak of the Smith & Wesson Police Positive. 1908 Colt 25, cute little thing, I approve. Luger, classic pistol. The Colt 1911, the famed long-barreled Colt. 2 thumbs up for this classic. Savage 99, Fleming and his love of lever guns. You know, deep down, I think he wanted to be a cowboy. MP40, solid sub-gun for the time. Colt Peacemaker, why not? Derringer, oh, that sneaky scaremonger. Sure, it'll work. High-tech sniper rifle, sounds very Bondian. AK-47, classic communist block rifle. So, we've sorted and sifted through all the Fleming novels and made some choices and comments on the weapons that Fleming used. It was fun to reread the novels again and to see what Fleming was describing, even if he didn't know what he was talking about. And I'll end this video on this. 007 in New York, published in 1963. Now, no guns involved. But I can tell you, I'm not sure Fleming was a fan of New York, as he begins his essay with, I enjoyed myself least of all in New York. Honestly, I can't say I blame him. I've visited quite a few times, and I can't really say I enjoyed the city all that much either, but that's a personal thing. Through the story, Bond did share his recipe for scrambled eggs James Bond, which must be served with pink champagne, preferably Taittinger. So why end on this? When I started the series, I tried combining drinks and the weapons, but got bogged down. So I transitioned off the booze and just focused on the bullets. And now what I'll do is transition back to a new series focusing on Bond's booze and the books. Meanwhile, put away your PPK and have a martini. If you've made it this far, I thank you. Bye!